Welcome to another episode of Digging for the Truth. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the most lost generation in American history. We're talking about Generation Z, and I've got a couple of young men from that generation that we're going to invite into the conversation and see what they have to say about it right after this. Welcome to another episode of Digging for the Truth. I am Trent Taylor, your host, and we're going to talk about something that's been pretty heavy on my heart tonight. And for the last several months, maybe longer, I've had just a burden for the youngest generation that's kind of engaging in the workforce and so forth, and that is the Zoomers, Generation Z. And so these are the kids that were born between 1997 and 2012, roughly. There's some debate around some of that. But it's a really important conversation that I feel like we need to have because whenever I'm going to give you just some numbers here, and it'll blow your mind. If you'll recall back to Judges, okay, so when the Judges really kicked in, you have to remember what was going on. When Joshua died, they became, Baal worshipers. Well, what happened? Well, I want to begin with some scripture. So let's just start off with Judges, beginning in chapter 2, verse 10. It says that when all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. So we're talking about, this generation no longer believed, maybe they kind of like, how people talk about the Holocaust wasn't real and stuff like that. Now, that's maybe a wholly, completely different thing. But when you don't share... Even, in fact, if you go around all these, even in current Generation X and boomers and stuff, most people can't tell you anything about their family past, sometimes only grandparents, but it's rare if you can even talk about great-grandparents. Well, this is exactly what happened in the scripture. In fact, if you'll recall, whenever the Israelites were still, in Egypt, it says that a Pharaoh came that did not know Joseph. So... we know the story of Moses and what God did and led them out. Well, God leads them into the land of milk and honey. And then then all of a sudden, when you get into Judges, the Israelites, they continually turn back to demonic worshiping Baal and the Baals. Well, what had happened is that when Joshua died, these following generations, they had not been telling them about their history, who they truly were, where they came from, and reminding them of what God did for them. So why is that important? Well, I'm going to talk about Generation Z. Generation Z, only 2 out of 10 profess Jesus Christ as their Lord and their Savior. Only 2 out of 10. It's the most lost generation in the history of America. And not only that, the same generation has some very, we're going to talk about it here in a minute, but some very strange political ideologies. They're also the most fatherless generation in history. So there's culpability from my generation, from their parents. There's so many fatherless homes. And, when you don't have a stable home life, it's going to produce unstable fruit. These children just don't, they're not. And so there's a lot going on. And in some parts of the country, it's far worse than others, obviously. So I want to go ahead and give you some numbers, some statistics, some things that as I was studying, but one of the highest suicide rates amongst any young group of people is Generation Z. They have an extremely high suicide rate, and sometimes they're being called now the nest generation because so many of them that go out into the workforce are because they are really actually so financially impacted by the things going on in the world that they almost can't afford to make it outside the home. So you have between the ages of 18 and 25 and a really high percentage. I want to say something, well, actually have just I think 54% is what it says here. 54% are living at home. And I don't really necessarily have a problem with that. If you have a healthy home, I actually think that's a good thing. I think that if you're not married and you're going to school and you're doing these things, and then you have a healthy home life, then I think it's actually a good thing. But here's what's disturbing. So this is the most liberal and activist generation in American history. A whopping between 50 and 60% support Marxism or socialism or flat out communism. Now, the reason I say between 50 and 60, so there was a 5-fold increase between the year 2019 and 2020 of this generation that had favorable views of socialism, Marxism, and communism. And when I say this, when we talk about they cannot know history or know anything about who Karl Marx is. I've talked about Karl Marx on this program before, and he was a vile, demonic, evil man. Evil man. And his ideology, Marxist ideology, socialism, it does not work. One of the biggest problems is with this generation is that they have not been taught about our Constitution. It is actively taught incorrectly inside the schools or not taught at all. And so they don't really know truly what their rights are. And when I hear these young people say, I know my rights, they really don't. And so what do they want to do? Well, think about the year where they grew favorable towards Marxism and socialism and communism between 2019 and 2020. What happened? COVID, right? Get this. Generation Z, these have it is like over 70% of that generation believe that Trump had more to do with the spreading of COVID than the China's President Xi Jinping. So if that's the case, where are they getting their information? And here in a little bit, here shortly, I'm going to start. I have a couple of young people here that are from this generation that probably can give us some insight. But before we go to them, I want to talk just about what we need to do. We need to train up the next generation. It says in Psalm 71:18, it says, "Now also when I am old and gray-headed, O God, do not forsake me until I declare your strength to this generation." He's saying, I want this next generation, when it says I want to declare your strength, I want this next generation to know how mighty you are, God, to pass that baton to the next generation who's going to serve you, just like Joshua and Caleb did. Joshua and Caleb, they were handed the baton and they did something amazing with it. But what happened? And I'm not it's a bigger topic than I want to cover tonight. But there's definitely something that happened in the training up of the generation following Joshua. One more thing I want to mention, and then we're going to bring these guys on. It says, "Remind each generation of mighty acts." Think of this. In Psalms 145:4, it says, "One generation shall praise your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts." Again, what has God done in your life? I can tell you just even, from my marriage and seeing people, that have been in my circle that have been healed from things that God has brought me through and out of. I mean, we need to talk about what God has done for us and that we know that it was God and it could have only been God to the next generation. We have got to share our faith with these young people. With that being said, I have two young men that I would like to introduce to the show. I have with me Luke Taylor. I'm going to introduce him first. This is actually my little brother, believe it or not quite as good looking as me. How you doing, Luke?
Doing good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. So, yes, I'm going to explain it. Luke is my younger brother. He's 26 years younger than me. So we... it's kind of funny when we mention that. A lot of people don't believe that we can actually be related. In fact, I want to bring on this next young man, and this would be Nick Immel. Nick, how you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. In fact, you mentioned a minute ago, you were even asking, so are y'all really related? So how you doing? How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. Excited to be here.
Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Right.
I want to talk to you guys about just your generation. So, Nick, I think you're slightly older than Luke. I think you're 22. Is that right, Nick?
Yes, sir. 22.
And Luke, you're 21.
Yes, sir.
At least until February, right?
I'm proud of you for remembering that.
Hey, I've got 5 kids. I got put on the spot the other day, seeing if I could remember each of my kids how old they were. Yeah, so I did pretty good. I have some questions that I want to pose you guys. First of all, do y'all feel like, that y'all's generation, y'all heard me talking here in kind of at the beginning of the podcast, just about it's the most lost generation, in the history of America. Do y'all feel that? Do y'all see that? Nick, let me start with you, bud.
Yeah, man. I would definitely say that I feel that almost to a level that isn't just confined to this generation, which I definitely think that we, as Generation Z, are kind of paving the way, I guess, in that sense. But I feel like it's really just America as a whole, especially.
Oh, I agree with that.
Is really just in a place where we have not been, at least since I've been alive, and that we shouldn't be, for sure.
Well, on that point, Nick, I mean, that's never been this bad. In fact, I mean, today, you know, I was listening to, there's a new song that we're going to do this weekend. And are you playing this weekend?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. There's that new song we're doing, and I don't want to spoil it on the podcast because this will come out first, but I listened to it about 3 or 4 times, and it's just basically the message is, come Lord Jesus. And it's a sweet song, but I feel that. I mean, I'm grieving. See, I got to experience this country before it was totally stupid. Neither of you really have. You know, I mean, and so do you feel the same way, Luke? I mean, do you I know that you said something to me the other day, and it had to do with our granddad. So I'm going to give a little, you know, our granddad was born in 1924. He fought in World War II. He was on a ship for 26 months. And you made a statement that, you know, that generation, you had these young people who were signing up, lying about their age so they could sign up to fight for their country. Tell me more about that, Luke.
Yeah, you know, now, you know, I mean, if there was a war to break out, like, everyone hates America, and we don't stand for what we believe in. And half the problem is we don't even know what we believe in. And it's just sad. I mean, the founding fathers built this country on God, and now it's kind of the separation of religion and politics, which I don't feel like you should ever take God out of anything. And I mean, like I said the other day with our granddad, that generation, they lied about their age to go to war because they're that passionate about protecting our country.
Well, you're absolutely right. And it's different for y'all in a little sense. I mean, so I was born in the mid 70s. And so I remember as the 1984 Olympics, and Ronald Reagan was president, Gipper. And I remember watching, I can even remember with it's this huge TV. I mean, but anyway, it's a big old, you know, CRT screen. But I remember watching Mary Lou Retton, and I think it was I remember just people standing on the podium and wearing the American flag coming down behind them, and just they played the American, you know, just our national anthem. And I had an overwhelming, just, I wouldn't say religious experience, but I mean, I felt so proud to be an American.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is an experience that either of you have gotten to have. Would you agree with that?
I mean, look at the women's soccer player. I forget her name, but it's just like her entire thing is she hates America. I mean, she plays for USA, but
Ravenel.
It was like yeah. It's just like, that's kind of what I've grown up with is, you know, they hate USA. I'm pretty sure she refused to go to meet Trump when they won, and I mean, it's sad.
What about you, Nick? Do you feel kind of the same way, or have you had that feeling of just being extremely proud of your nation, or do you feel like everybody else is kind of against it and you're the only one for it?
I think I have. I think we're fortunate to be in the Panhandle, and I've gotten small glimpses of that, but on a super large scale like you're talking about, I don't think I've ever really gotten to see unless I'm watching, you know, NASCAR or something. But
not even NASCAR now, dude. NASCAR had a drag day, drag queens, LGBTQ day.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, NASCAR is turning woke, man. I mean, it's absolutely everywhere. I remember when we could at least agree on stuff like that. Sports. Let's talk about sports. Okay. So, I mean, I used to be it didn't matter if you're a Democrat, didn't matter if you're a Republican. You know, your generation is, like I mentioned, is the most liberal generation in American history, to the point where they believe, I mean, they don't do any research. They just believe what the mainstream media and the leftists say. And what's crazy is that Democrats, and I'm not trying to make this about Democrats or Republicans. There's plenty of Republicans I don't like either. What's going on in the House and all these, I mean, there were things that Republicans and Democrats, we would agree on. Satan is bad. We used to agree on that. And we can't even agree on that now. But we could watch football. You could take two guys who might disagree politically, but we could go sit down watch a football game, hang out. There was no politics to it. It was apolitical, like the military is supposed to be. And now even the military is political. And that is just so for your generation to see this. I mean, it burdens my heart. So I want to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, what do you feel like is the biggest challenge that your generation is facing? Luke, I'll let you take it first. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of it's the media. You know, I feel like the media is definitely controlled, and I feel like our generation just kind of doesn't do the research. They don't really care. Just kind of that group think mentality of whatever's popular, I'm just going to go with that. And when all your media that you see, you intake, is completely against Christianity, I mean, that's just kind of what they go for. That's just what they believe.
Well, so it's interesting you mentioned that. So it's called collectivism, and this is something that wasn't actually a narrative that we had previously. And collectivism is just that they're first of all, as Christians, as believers, where do we get our identity? Christ. Yeah. Right? Okay. So if you don't know God, you don't know who you are. And if you don't know who you are, you can't know your purpose. I mean, but every person, and you can't get away from this. We were designed by God to be worshipers, to worship Him. So your generation, I mean, I see them worshiping all kinds of things, from, the electronics and video games to the phone. I mean, social media is the most demonic thing that's really come on, and it's been part of y'all's life. See, y'all have never been disconnected from the internet. I didn't have. Get this, okay? So I was talking to Brandy about this the other day. I mean, we were married and had 2 kids before the first smartphone was available. Think of that. Okay, yeah. Shut up, Luke. I see you laughing. I'm not that old. All right, but what my point is how quickly all this has come on the scene. So what's your take? I mean, what do you feel like, we talked about the biggest, hurdles that your generation is facing. Why do you think that your generation, and Nick, I'm going to start with you on this one, but why do you think that your generation is so easily led away from God?
I think it's, exactly as you were saying, is we don't know who we are. We don't know what we want, what we don't want. All we know is that this idea that is pushed on us of, I know what I want, I know what I feel, and I'm just going to go with whatever that is. And so if that is something I saw on Instagram today, then I'm going to go with that. And really, I think that, and you were asking Luke, I mean, what's the biggest challenge? I think the biggest challenge that we face as a generation is this idea that has been pushed on us of like, you do you.
That's a horrible phrase,
love yourself. Oh yeah. And you do exactly what you feel and do whatever you want. And we're just going to take away all the consequences to that so that you get to feel better, when at the end of the day, we end up feeling worse. But
so you touch on a point there. Okay. So, I mean, I've taught for years and years about just how horrible, emotions are wonderful servants, but they're horrible masters. And everything you hear now is, well, how do you feel? Yeah. And we're not taught what to do with emotions. Feelings are real, but you can really feel them. But an example of this is that I have been very angry at Brandy before, and over the years we have learned that, okay, I'm mad at you, and here's what you said, and this is what I heard. And so it's like, is that? And it's, oh, no, that's not what I meant at all. What does the word say about, the enemy? That he's the accuser of the brethren. He wants to accuse us to one another. So what does that do? I have had feelings. In fact, I heard, I think Chris Valdon say this way. If I had a friend who lied to me as often as my feelings, we wouldn't be friends. Yeah. I think it's a good, so I think you touch on a really important point, that people are led by their emotions. Where do you feel like your generation, like, we all have to have a source, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I've watched you 2 young men. Nick, I meant to get some B-tape of you playing in worship. I tell you what, I just want to brag on you. I don't want to swell your head or anything, but you lead worship, and you're a phenomenal worship leader. You're 22 years old, and you lead with authority. And I want you to touch on that for a minute. Where does this come from? I mean, because you get up there and you really do it like, I mean, you're an old pro.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Man, I would say that thankfully none of it comes from me. You know, if any of it came from me, if any of it was me trying to do something or create something, then it would just all go to crap. And thankfully that authority isn't grounded in anything that I have to do with worship or the songs that I might have chosen that week or how I feel that morning. You know, we were talking about feelings, but that authority really just comes from Christ.
It does.
And I think it's in Acts, Paul's talking about, you know, I am who I am because Christ has made me this way. He has trained me up to be this way. And thankfully I have had nothing to do with, you know, any authority or anything good about me, but it is all just the Lord thankfully pushing his way through, you know, the mess that is Nick Immel. So,
well, and you've had some good mentors along your way.
Yeah. Amen.
I know that Carrie Watley, you played with her in the youth at one point, right? And Paxton plucked you, you know, and so you've had some good people pour into you. Who are some of the other people? I know that Carrie and Paxton have definitely poured, but who just in your life, doesn't have to be necessarily worship, but who are the people that have poured into your life that have helped guide you down this path? Because you had to have influence. If you were influenced solely by, you did make these choices, which I commend you, but I feel like you've had to have good people lead you in this direction. Who would you give credit to?
Yeah, of course. I would definitely give a lot of credit to Tommy and Lana Spencer. They were people in my life through thick and thin, through me just figuring out, you know, what a guitar is and what worship is. You know, Tommy gave me these opportunities that, looking back, I'm like, I don't know why in the world Tommy would give, you know, a freshman in high school, a sophomore in high school, an opportunity to lead all these people when I've maybe
He's
done
good
it
that way.
You know,
he saw something.
Yeah, and so he really he has a great gift of just having a lot of faith in people and seeing the best in people, and thankfully, you know, that was seen in me, and so he's been a huge role and a huge part of my life.
Well, that's beautiful. Well, I'm going to pose the same question to you, Luke. So I want to brag on you a little bit. You know, I know that I'm the good-looking brother, but you know, in all honesty, you've always been a good kid. I'm proud of who you are. So, and you chose early on. I mean, I remember just having conversations and watching you. You chose early on that you wanted to go down the right path. You wanted to be pure when you get married. So, who are the people that influenced you in this direction?
Definitely our dad. I mean, ever since I was a kid, he poured wisdom into me, and he always was very good about letting me make my faith my own and not casting his on me. And I mean, that's been a huge blessing. And then also Cody Hodges, he led a Bible group I started going to when I was in junior in high school. And that's kind of where my passion came for preaching. And it's kind of, he poured a lot into me and kind of taught me a lot about that and just how to lead. And he's been a huge mentor in my life.
Well, I tell you, you know, I remember when I was a young man, I was married even, I was asking God, like, God, I want a mentor. I want somebody to mentor me. And then I realized how many mentors I actually had in my life. And people who had been steering me away from stupidity. Because, see, unlike you, you know, you guys, I had a proclivity to be, you know, I was a very immoral young man, but I was an idiot. And some might argue that I still am. But, you know, I'm a redeemed idiot now. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
But the one thing that is, when you finally have that encounter with God, and so I have a couple of things I want to touch on. So if I were to ask you guys, do you believe we're living in end times? How does your generation, how do you respond to that right now? Do you think that you're living in end times? I'm going to kick off with you, Nick. I'm putting you on the spot.
No, that's all right. I think I haven't looked at this a ton, but I think that whenever Jesus ascended, like, we have been in the end times, I guess you could say. I don't know exactly the technical terms for that, but I mean, like, I'm waiting. I think everyone else, all Christians around me are waiting, and like, this is, people continue to say like, oh, it's going to happen in 2020 and 2000 and whatever. But I think that, these end times have just been happening, and we've just been waiting, as the apostles were whenever Jesus left them there. And they thought that was going to be a short period of time. And, some
Well,
people think
no,
so
you're
now.
right.
And yeah, but
Well, I kind of like in The Chosen, whenever, they talk about, use the word soon. How long is soon? There's a kind of,
yeah,
if you haven't
for
seen The
real.
Chosen, it's pretty funny. They, because soon can be, well, how long is soon?
Uh-huh.
The reason I say that is because I know a lot of young people who are grieving, kind of this, because everybody keeps talking inside the church. In Jesus says that we won't know the day nor the hour. And I do a lot of eschatology on this. So if you've been watching the podcast, you kind of know where I stand on the whole thing. However, we are still here. Okay. And I'll go ahead and tell you guys this. If anybody ever says that Jesus come back on this date, you can go ahead and scratch that one off the calendar, because it ain't happening.
Yeah.
Okay. The thing is that we are here, and what God has commanded us to do is to proclaim his name above all names, to go out and make disciples, to be the salt and the light. That's who you guys are. And so, it's important that you don't let some of the conversation over here on the end time stuff just say, because, in fact, that happened in the 1970s called the Jesus Revolution, 60s and 70s. If y'all heard about that, you'll probably seen the movie.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, but what it was, there was just revival happening all over the country. And what so many people did is that instead of going to college and getting in the workforce and everything else, they said, well, Jesus is coming back any day, so I'm just going to wait. I'm not going to do anything. Well, we lost so many people that should have been in politics, that should have been in the school system, that should have been out there. And so there's a phrase that came from that says that you can be so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. And that's why I kind of posed that question. So how about you, Luke? Do you feel, there's all this conversation around end times. Does that, you feel like it has an impact on how you're making decisions?
No, because it says, like a groom waiting for the bride, the only the father knows. And I think just my mentality on it is, be ready, know where your faith is, but also, like, throughout the rest of the time, like, bring as many people as you can. So, my mentality with it is, make sure I know where my faith is and know what I believe, and while my time on earth, bring as many people as I can.
Well, that leads me to the next question I have for you guys, and I'm very sincere in this. So you know me, I'm an evangelist. I'm leading people to Christ is, I feel like my calling and what I'm supposed to do with my life. I think that's what all of us are supposed to do. Okay, if you have a relationship with Jesus, you're called. But I'll tell you this: there's a generational divide. I'm not trying to be mean. You two young men, honestly, I get you a whole lot more than I get a lot of your generation. Some of the things that, people wear and the stuff they listen to. And I'm like, man, pull up your pants. Just all kinds of stuff, and so I try not to judge. Okay. It's one of the struggles that we all have, but there's a divide, right? Even to how, like, we wear hats. So, I'm wearing a hat and you have a little bit of a curve, but now it's like, you're supposed to wear them like this, totally flat out straight. All right. And so we see the world differently. Our worldviews are different. And if you have all these kids that are lost and the world has them, the world has it figured out. TikTok has it figured out. How do we, this includes me, how do we go after your generation? We're dropping the ball clearly. How do we reach your generation? Luke, I'll start with you this time.
I think the biggest thing for me is just being sincere. With my classmates, a lot of my friends, they were kind of lost in the world and just throughout time. I didn't, go up to them and, the old Bible thumper and thump them with the Bible. I think that what worked for me is just having that time with them, the fellowship, and really just being sincere with the time I spend with them, and, bringing Christ into the conversation and letting his light shine through me, being that light in a dark place that, they eventually ask, like, hey, like why do you think the way you think? And, just being ready for that conversation.
Well, I mean, I think that's really good. I mean, we have to be able to defend our faith, know why we believe, what we believe, right? What about you? I mean, what are some practical things that we can do, Nick, going after your generation?
I think it just starts with understanding that, when they're living and our generation is living as they are, it's extremely hopeless. I think you can see this a lot with other religions, that whenever you're living just spinning your wheels looking for something, that you have to come to people knowing that, they don't have hope. They don't have hope like we have hope. And so coming from it from a practical standpoint, I think it's just meeting people where they are and being sincere in your faith. I think a lot of people my age especially think that Christians are a very specific way, that they're extremely regimented and that they can't do anything, or they're just really kind of weird. And so I think being sincere with them of like, I'm a Christian, I'm a person too, just like you, and I'm not depressed. I have peace and hope and faith in something that's so much greater than, whatever I want right now. And so I think practically coming at it from that standpoint would be extremely helpful to our generation.
So, there's a lot of things. I mean, the enemy, he comes, around like a roaring lion, right? Seeing what he can kill, steal, and destroy. But that which he can devour. And one thing, he wants to devour this younger generation. So if you don't know who you are, it's really easy to be just blown around like a leaf in the wind. And I think, first of all, I mean, people have looked at me, I mean, you look at me like, oh, that's got to be some kind of, cracker redneck, I mean, until you get to know me, right? So we all form opinions. And I guess I have no problem. You can call me a cracker, whatever. I'm probably going to get banned on YouTube now. All right. But, that's the thing, is that we're so quickly and easily offended. And I feel like that's one of what makes it hard to reach out to your generation, because much of your generation has the mentality that if you don't agree with everything they say or agree with everything they agree with, then you're their enemy. Is that true, or am I just kind of interpreting it the wrong way?
Oh, no, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Luke. Tell me. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't agree with what they agree with, they kind of just attack you. Like, you're homophobic, you're racist, you're sexist, all this stuff. And, it's just kind of having that foundation of, it's coming from what the Bible says. And, a lot of just being able to have a civil conversation with them and not just, start, that. I feel like it's just so easy just to start that battle of fighting back and forth. And for me, I feel like just an easier way to combat that is just, like we've said, being sincere and really taking that almost like approaching them where they're at and just sitting down with them.
So you have the similar take on that, Nick?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we can all attest to the things that have happened. Mainly it's just division among people. I think especially in politics, and now it has trickled into, you were talking about, we can't even watch football with someone who opposes us politically now. And I think just trying to find a way around that to where, like, I'm not here to, make light of our differences or argue with you or try and sway your opinions. I'm here just to try and connect with you, like Luke was saying.
Well, I think that kind of goes back to even talking about belief. I mentioned, earlier that God created us for worship, period. He created us to be in a relationship with him. So if I'm not worshiping God, I have to be worshiping something. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things so your Generation Z is the most activist and cancel culture generation. They're the ones. But what's interesting, when I started researching this, it was actually a small percentage. Only 2 to 5% of your generation are the ones creating all the trouble. Over 50%, and this number blew my mind, over 50% of your generation have a negative view of cancel culture. Does that surprise you?
Not really? A little bit.
So what number surprises you?
I think that small number probably surprises me. That 2 to 5% is pretty surprising. But when you when you start to think about it, like they are really the loudest people. So it would make sense that they're so small, but they're also extremely loud. So we don't really think about their numbers, I guess you could say.
Well, there's other groups that have done the same thing and taken over and hijacked nations, right? I mean, it's what not the Nazis. I mean, the Nazis were almost stamped out. Okay, I mean, until they rode the wave of financial crisis in, and that's why you hear all these politicians and all that. They're always trying to create a crisis. You've heard it said, from I don't want this to be a political podcast today, but you can't let a good crisis go to waste. Well, that's the mentality that has been beat into your generation. So you're constantly looking for, or there has to be, or you thrive in crisis. And so anyway, well, I'll tell you this. First of all, guys, I appreciate you coming on and sharing. Do y'all have any other final thoughts as we kind of start wrapping up here? Luke, you have any final thoughts? No? All right.
No, sir.
Well, first of all, I want to just tell you I'm proud of you two young men. Y'all are doing good. You're doing it right. But I'm going to go ahead and say this. It's not going to be easy. I know it hasn't been easy, but because you're picking Jesus and because you're picking the path that you are, it's going to be tough. But I'll tell you this: God will be with you through every single step of that and piece of that. So I just again, thanks for coming on the program, and we'll have to do this again.
Oh yeah.
Well, thanks for having us, Trent.
All right, thanks, guys. All right. Well, as I said, this is one of those topics that as the adults and the parents of this generation that we need to be reaching out and having conversations. And so it's just as a parent, I want to encourage you on this. Like I said, I've had a burden for a while, and the Lord has created opportunity for me to start sitting down with young men in this generation and to pass on what little knowledge I might have. But we have got to be the loudest and the closest voices to our children. And, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to give a quick blurb for these. Do not give your kids one of these. And if you do, make sure that they don't have social media, because that's one of the things that will draw their ear away from you faster than anything else. Well, anyway, thanks for joining us here on Digging for the Truth. I appreciate you visiting us today. And I want to say this. If you have not liked or subscribed, please do. Tell your friends about the podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.